Alright guys, so today we are going to be doing something a little different, I think, because I'm waiting for a package. I wanted to do this video somewhere else, but because I have to stick around the house today, I figured why not do it here so you guys can see that it doesn't really matter where you are when you want to try to get better at using a gimbal and learn these techniques. You don't have to go anywhere special. You can do this in the comfort of your own home. I've been wanting to do this for a couple days now, but it's been really rainy. That today's one of the first nice days outside, and I want to do it now before it gets crazy hot. It's been like 17 degrees Celsius. Today it's supposed to be like 34, so it just doesn't make sense. Alright, so the first thing you and I are going to talk about is walking. And I want to make sure you guys realize I'm going to be using a Smooth-X. This is a gimbal that I just recently got, and it's important to realize that this is a 2-axis gimbal. So all the stuff I'm doing here, you don't need a fancy gimbal for it. This one here, nice basic gimbal. This one comes in at around the $100 Canadian mark, about $70 US, maybe even a little cheaper if you can find that. We'll leave links down below to this gimbal if you're interested. But 2-axis gimbal, and we're going to show you how to get some good techniques, some good beginner movements so that you can get good at using a gimbal. Alright, let's go do number one, and that's learning how to walk. Alright, so the number one thing I think for you and I to kind of be aware of when we're walking is that if you and I just walk normal, especially with a 2-axis gimbal, there's still going to be a lot of up and down movement. So you'll see that it's pretty good. It's definitely way better than you and I would normally do if we were just walking, right? Being able to, but the 2-axis gimbal especially, and the 3-axis, they all have this issue where you get this movement up and down when we just have that natural walking motion. So you really have to watch that because we have to learn how to re-walk again. So one of the things to get in the habit of doing, I'm trying to do this here, is really gonna get your knees down. You wanna get your knees bent and really just kind of slow yourself down so that you can do this. Now if you're vlogging, this is a little bit unnatural. It feels really weird because your upper body becomes the stabilizer. You're really trying to focus on keeping that camera level, but it does look way better, and after a bit of practice it actually turns out really good. So again, we'll just kind of come back here, and it's just making sure, I find that the knees never really extend. You just gotta keep your knees always kind of bent. You can see how much more stable that becomes when you're doing that. So there we go, there's number one. See how much smoother that is? Just making sure I go heel to toe and kind of making sure my knees stay bent and do all the absorbing. Now the other thing that's really important for this, I find, is making sure you're wearing shoes. Now that may sound like an obvious thing, but I know a lot of people, myself included, that like to wear sandals and flip-flops and things like that. And that can be a real issue because if your feet aren't getting a real good firm feeling for the ground, that can hurt. So make sure you got a good pair of shoes on when you're trying to work with your gimbal. All right, let's go number two. All right, so tip number 2 and number 3. And I think someone's doing some whippersnipping in the backyard, so I apologize for that in advance. But number 2 and number 3 are kind of important ones, I find. And those are simply shooting in reverse, number 1. So setting your target up first and pulling back from the shot. You and I have a tendency to want to always move into the shot and film the way it's going to be displayed for those that are watching it. But if we actually record it backwards and then play it in reverse, we can get that video footage to be smoother. Number two is record in slow motion. So if we don't need or have people or cars or anything in the shot that can make it so that the viewer knows that it's shot in slow motion is going to smooth that footage out for us. So we're going to go over here right now and we're going to shoot some footage in slow motion and in reverse so that you can see what I'm talking about. Alright guys, so we have the camera here and we have a bike. Nothing overly exciting, but these are things that we sometimes shoot. And one of the issues that we have, of course, is that when we have our gimbal and let's say we want to focus on that GT logo and we're back here and we're like, okay, so we're moving in and we can never kind of get it right, so you end up kind of bouncing up and down to get that frame right. Whereas if we start here on the shot and pull back, we get a much smoother shot, because coming backwards, there's nothing in our way. We have it lined up already. Now, if we take this and we play it in slow motion, so we actually grab it in slow motion and do that exact same thing. So we come in here, for instance, see if it'll focus yet, and just kind of do one of these. And then when we play that back, we should get a really nice smooth shot. So mixing tip or technique 2, which is pulling back in reverse so that we can play it backwards, and then playing it in slow motion or recording it in slow motion so that we get that shot to extend over a period of time, will smooth out all those frames. The other thing, of course, is we can now move quicker because we're going to be playing it back slow motion, which means that when we move faster, we're naturally going to be smoother than if we're trying to keep our hands really steady. All right, so that's 2 and 3. Now let's go to 4, and maybe 4 and 5 together. All right, let's do that. So again, we're going to try to mix 2 of these together because I think they work really well. First one is locking focus and exposure, because when we have a target, let's say that bike we were shooting at, we don't want the camera to be hunting as we're moving. So we know where we want to end up, so make sure we set that focus to that point. It's not usually that bad if it starts off a little fuzzy but ends up sharp where we end up wanting to be. So it's better to lock your focus and exposure on that spot, because if not, your camera has a tendency, especially on a smartphone, to kind of hunt. So it actually pulses a lot when it sees things. The other thing that we're going to do, and which is kind of technique number 5, is what's called a reveal, and this is where locking exposure and locking focus become really important. And I'll use this for a minute, and I'm going to just bring the camera over here for a second, kind of right here. So I want to shoot down this area, so this very far in comparison to where I'm going to start. So I'm going to do what's called a reveal, which is your technique, where you're going to start the camera kind of here and you're going to pull across. Now what happens is if we don't set exposure or focus, it's going to focus on here. It's also going to focus on something that's a lot darker than it is over here. That's the important part. So I want to set my focus right there and my exposure there. The other issue with this shot is as I'm coming across here, you'll notice that as I hit here, the camera probably will try to focus over there, which is what I want. But there's this tree branch here. So as I come across, the camera's going to see this. And if I don't have this set to focusing there by manually focusing, it's going to try to get this. And now my camera's going to try that hunting. So I'm going to put this camera up somewhere, and we're gonna do that shot. One sec. All right, so I got the camera really high. I don't know if this is gonna work, so hopefully this camera doesn't fall down. But anyway, we're here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this, and I know that this is where I want to end up. So I'm gonna use my camera app, and I'm gonna lock my exposure and focus right there. I am gonna be shooting this in slow motion because I like that movement. And I'm gonna start here, hit my record button, and simply we're gonna start to come across. Now, even though this branch is in my shot, it shouldn't matter. And I'm going to come back and just do that a couple times, just so I can make sure I can find the one that I like the most. So just a nice little shot back and forth. Do that a couple times. And we got a cool little reveal, which is really nice. Now, the other thing that you can do, and you should kind of look for, is you guys can't see it right now, but the sun's directly above me, and this tree actually can provide a super nice shot for that kind of stuff, because the tree has a little bit of movement. And so what I'm going to do again is I'm going to kind of set that up there, and I'm going to lock my focus on one of these branches and set my exposure for it. And then all I'm going to do is hit record, and I'm going to slowly move up to the sun, so I get this sun blast that kind of creeps through the tree every once in a while. And because my exposure is set like that, I should probably get some really cool shots. I'm just going to kind of come back and forth. I'm doing this in slow motion again because what I want to do is be able to go through that footage later and find that little piece that I actually want. So shoot more than you want, shoot a bunch of stuff, kind of go back and forth, let the camera roll, that you can find that perfect little shot where that sun kind of peeks out behind the leaves, behind the branches, and you get this nice little sun flare that pops out. Really nice when you're shooting in slow motion, especially if there's some wind and the branches are moving. All right, that was tip number 5. All right, so here's a bonus tip number 6. You know, it doesn't really matter how long you've played with a gimbal, if you've had one for a while, if you're new to gimbals, if you have a 2-axis like the Smooth-X, if you have a 3-axis, if you're playing with a smartphone, if you're playing with a GoPro, if you're playing with a SLR or mirrorless. Tip number 6 is practice. Get out there on your spare time, play with your gimbal, figure out how to get the shots that you want, because if you don't practice, then the time will come when you want to get those gimbal shots and you're not going to get the ones you want because the technique isn't something that you're good at yet. So it always comes down to being able to practice. Go out in your backyard as I did today. You don't need to go anywhere fancy. You can do all this kind of stuff in the house. Do it in your backyard, do it in the front yard, go out to the park, shoot it in your bedroom. Doesn't matter. Practice. Bonus tip number 6. And that's it, my friends. I'm going to leave you there. We did all the shooting today on this little gimbal. This is a 2-axis Zhiyun Smooth-X. About $60, $70 US and about $100 Canadian. And a 2-axis gimbal actually does pretty good. Just the one thing you have to realize, it has that motion kind of this way. It just doesn't have this motion. So once you get the other techniques like your walking and things like that, I think it works pretty good. All right, guys, save your money, get a gimbal, practice, and we'll see you guys next video. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and happy shooting. Later, guys.